Hi, and welcome to a Yin Yoga podcast. If you are new around here, this might not be the best episode to start with, although maybe it'll set the stage for the rest. Today, I'm going to talk about critical thinking. I'm going to address some feedback, and I'm going to define the term Vinyasa bunny. That's what's coming up. So, we're going to talk about critical thinking and also address some questions and Vinyasa bunnies. Is a Vinyasa bunny? The other thing I want to mention, though, before we get started, is that as usual, this is an adult podcast with adult conversations and adult language. So if you have small people around, grab some headphones now. Okay, let's dive in. Today, I wanted to talk about something that is very near and dear to my heart, and that is critical thinking. So in this episode, we're going to talk a little bit about what is critical thinking? How is this even relevant to our teaching, to our yin practice? And I'm going to do a little bit of housekeeping and addressing some comments that I have gotten. So that is what you're in store for today. But before we get to all of that, a couple of things to mention. The first one being that if you're listening to this as it comes out, so if you're listening to this in January 2026, the spring round of my Therapeutic Yin Training is open for registration. There is a link in the show notes that you can check out and you can join. So if you've been listening for a while and like the idea of studying with me, that is in the show notes. And registration will be open until about a week before we start. So early March is when the registration deadline is. So if you're wanting some more training, hop onto the link and you can learn more about that training. And of course, if you have questions, you can send me a message via the contact form on my website, or you can just message me on Instagram. Either one works just great if you've got questions about that course. It's 100 hours as at the time of this recording, 100-hour therapeutic yin, and it's live on Zoom. So not pre-recorded. This is a live course we go through together. So you can learn more details about that by clicking that link. All right. And then I wanted to read a little feedback. This is by Carrie. I'm trying to say her name right. Holborough, Holboro. Hopefully I said that correctly. So thank you, Carrie. Earlier this year, I came across your podcast and wanted to start from the beginning. I'm just now up to January 2025. This is what I do with someone who captures my imagination, and I want to know everything about what they're sharing. I did this with Ram Dass and Sharon Salzberg, etc. Ooh, that's some lovely company to be included with. Thank you. I'm loving your podcast and fallen in love with Yin more due to your podcast. Yes, I'm 350-hour trained, but hundreds of extra hours in teens, kids, chair yoga, the elderly, meditation, restorative, yoga nidra, and also all my yoga therapy modules and most of my practices. I did an additional yin module, 40 hours in total, with a teacher here who trained with Paul. He's also a physio. So there was a lot of it depends. And I always smile when I hear you say that. That is very much a Grilley trained thing to say. Well, it depends. I'm mentioning this as no matter how much training you do as a teacher, there is always so much more that you can do so that you can grow and continue to develop. Being prepared to let go of what no longer feels right or is just wrong. And I love that you call us out, urging us with love to commit to self-study. So thank you. I listen to you traveling to practice and teach. When returning, your voice calms and engages my imagination, informing my teaching. Oh, thank you so much, Carrie. Appreciate that very, very much. I love getting your feedback, y'all. So there's a few ways you could do that. If you've been loving the podcast, you could send me an email. That's what that was. It was an email from Carrie. You could send me a DM on Instagram. You could, if you were on YouTube right now, you can leave me a comment below the video. If you're on Spotify, you can also leave comments. So those are a few ways that you can let me know how the show has helped you. It can also give me ideas for subjects. I'm always looking to know, what do you want to know about? Give me your questions. They have to be yin related. Otherwise, they'd be off topic. But if you have yin questions, confusions, conundrums, concerns, quandaries, conniptions, please get at me. Either in the comments or message me on Instagram. Let me know if there's a topic that you would like me to cover. Okay, so that's enough of all that. So I wanted to talk briefly today about this concept of critical thinking. And the reason that I wanted to talk about this is because I received a couple of comments, a little bit of feedback on the podcast, and I want to address those. And one of them has to do with, those two have to do with critical thinking. The third one does not, but I'll also talk about that one. So little podcast feedback that I've gotten. Most of the feedback I get is very good, but occasionally I'll get something where people are like, yeah, but. So I'm going to share a couple of those, and we'll talk about critical thinking. I believe, unless I am hallucinating, that at the end of Paul's episode, which if you have not listened to Paul Grilley, episode was early on in season 1, I think it's episode 3 or 4. I can link it in the show notes for you. At the end of the interviews, I always ask people what the world needs now is, and I asked them to complete that sentence. And Paul said critical thinking. And I couldn't agree more. Critical thinking, which I'll define for you in a moment, is in my top 5 values, if not my top 3 as a human being. So there's love, freedom, honesty, critical thinking. I'm forgetting one, but you get the idea. Back when I was younger, critical thinking wasn't unusual. It was sort of taught to us, or maybe mirrored to us by our parents and teachers and educational facilities. If you went to high school or junior high or things like that, critical thinking was something that we were all taught about. And then I'm Gen X, for those of you that are wondering what that generation is, the one that always gets forgotten in between boomers and millennials. And then somewhere along the line, kind of late millennial and then past there, we've lost as a culture the skill of critical thinking. And we're sort of tiptoeing around everybody and walking on eggshells all the time, somehow not maybe pushing someone a little bit on their opinion has become more important than critical thinking. And I would argue that if you are not critically thinking, you actually don't have any of your own opinions. Your opinions have been handed to you and you've just taken them on, unless you have taken the time to pick them apart and think about them critically and logically. So let's define critical thinking. First of all, there's a bunch of definitions online. This one I think is clear and makes sense. Also, recently I saw this hilarious little bit of a comedian talking about critical thinking and Gen X. And if I can find it, because it's quite funny, I will put a link to that in the show notes. So I'll be on a little bit of a hunt for that after I hit record, and wish me luck. Hopefully I can find that because it's quite funny. So critical thinking is the ability to interpret, evaluate, and analyze facts and information available to inform a judgment or decide if something is right or wrong. More than just being curious about the world around you, critical thinkers make connections between logical ideas to see the bigger picture. Building your critical thinking skills means advocating for your ideas and opinions, logically presenting them, and making decisions for improvement. So that's the definition by, I think it's called Coursera.org. And then it says here, why is critical thinking important? Critical thinking is useful in many areas of your life. So career, it helps you make a well-rounded individual who has considered all of your options and possible solutions before making a choice. Critical thinking skills are important because they are universal, crucial for the economy, essential for improving. Critical thinking is that it is the basis of science and democracy. So one of the things that was so funny about that comedian that I was telling you about is that she talks about how in our generation, Gen Xers, we did this crazy thing where we actually listened to multiple sides of a story, took in that information, and then used our critical thinking skills to develop our own opinion. I know that sounds crazy, but I have noticed that this is a lost art and a lost skill. And it's super important in order for us to have an intelligent thinking, feeling, adapting, evolving culture. If we always just go with the status quo, we don't ever question it, we don't ever use our critical thinking skills, then we wouldn't have evolved at all. Can you imagine if I just recently found out Galileo wasn't the first one who realized the Earth and the sun thing, but he's the one who gets credited with it. What if he hadn't used any critical thinking skills and he had that little inkling and he just thought, nah, that can't be right. I mean, this is what I've been told my whole life, so this must be the truth. So the reason that I'm bringing this up is because as a human, critical thinking, not just in my yoga teaching, although it definitely comes in on my yoga teaching, is one of my key values. And so you will see that come out in this podcast repetitively. When I'm talking about subjects, you'll notice oftentimes that what I'm saying might be a little bit out of the box, maybe not the sort of status quo or familiar thing that you've heard. And this is because of my ability to critically think. You may notice when I talk to guests that I might have hard questions. And I may even, God forbid, pull in questions that might be challenging for them to answer. I'll tell you why this came up. I had one comment from somebody who said that she felt like I was a little edgy. Surprise! You obviously haven't seen me. I am a little edgy. Nothing wrong with that. Now, what happens oftentimes, especially with women, is that if a woman is direct, blunt, and clear, then especially other women can be uncomfortable with that. And now you get labeled as bossy, too assertive, edgy, etc. Right? So I don't sugarcoat things. I don't kiss people's butts. I don't blow up people's asses. None of that is part of my personality. So if you listen to me, you're going to hear me call it like it is, call it like I see it. And when I change my mind, I will say so. When new evidence comes to light, and if I realize, oh, actually what I've been saying, I don't know if I can stand behind that anymore, then I will change my opinion and I will let you know. But this idea that somebody can't be, air quotes, edgy, which really is just kind of code for a bunch of other things like assertive, blunt, clear, direct, etc. I don't know where that comes from. So I don't know if because I'm a woman, I'm supposedly being perceived as edgy, or if you're just uncomfortable with anybody who tells it like it is and asks hard questions and doesn't beat around the bush. But if you are, this is not the podcast for you, because that's not going to change. I'm not going to change who I am as a person to make some people more comfortable with the information that I'm sharing. So if that's you, if you're out there listening and you were the edgy commenter, if you find me too edgy, if being this direct, this honest, and even sometimes debating with my guests is too much for you, please feel free to listen to one of the other bazillion yoga podcasts out there, because that is not going to change. The second comment I got, and it was specific to a specific guest, but for the guest's sake, I will not say which one. Isn't there room for all opinions? Yes, absolutely. And there's room for debate. So again, I don't bring people on my show to like kiss up to them, regardless of who they are in the yin community, regardless of how beloved they are, regardless of how many books they have, regardless of how much of a hero they are in the yin world. I bring people onto my show to catch a glimmer of what information and learnings they may have for you. And if I disagree with something what somebody has said in their books, I will say so. And I will ask them about it. And there is nothing wrong with that. This, my friends, is critical thinking. And the fact that we've become a culture that is afraid or uncomfortable with critical thinking and debate, that's a big problem. That means you're living in an echo chamber. So the other thing I want to say on that is, by the way, if I invite a guest on and I do know that I have some questions that might be a little challenging for them, they know the questions in advance. Yep. Any ones that I think might be challenging, I will email them in advance and say, here are some of the questions I want to go over. Of course, I'm open to things that are not on this list, but let's make sure we cover these. So they know exactly what questions I'm going to ask them as far as the hard ones go. They have time to prepare. They have time to think about it. So I'm not like ambushing my guests with difficult questions or pushing back on some of my guests' opinions in a way that they aren't prepared for. They know that they're going to get asked these questions. So that's another thing I wanted to clear up. So apparently I'm edgy, and someone was uncomfortable with one particular guest. They made a comment that like, but aren't there all kinds of options and opinions? Obviously, yes, we said so in the episode. If you're uncomfortable with me pushing against a guest's opinion or the way a guest does something and saying, yeah, but what about this? And that doesn't have anything to do with my respect level for the guest. I don't bring people on that I don't respect. And actually, the guests that I have pushed back on a little bit, and not only did they know in advance, they had a great experience and they're coming on the podcast again. So whatever sort of protective mechanism you're feeling for sort of defending your yin yoga hero, please don't do that. The guests themselves are willing, able, and comfortable to have these difficult conversations. They're fine with the fact that opinions may be different and that I may push back and ask them to explain things. They know about it in advance and they're coming back on the show. So whatever discomfort you're feeling is your discomfort with that, not theirs. The guests they're doing fine. So just want to clear that up. That yes, sometimes I disagree with things that guests say. And so I ask them about it and I tell them my opinion. This is called critical thinking. This is what we do when we take in a bunch of information from different sources and then we discuss it with somebody, which is what we used to always do back in the day. I'm sounding like a dinosaur now, but we used to take in the information from all kinds of sources, listen to everybody's opinions that we could get access to, and then take in all that information and make up our own opinion. And so me asking the guests difficult questions or pushing back a little bit on something they've said or something that's in their book, that's just part of the critical thinking process. This is how we learn. This is how we decide if the information and the beliefs that we have are in fact ours. So I just wanted to mention those two things. I get mostly really good comments about the podcast, but I did get one that said they found me a little edgy. Yep. Depending how you define edgy. Yeah, you're probably right. If direct, blunt, clear, not messing around, not sugarcoating is edgy to you, then I'll own that. I'm edgy, also sarcastic, and I swear. So if that's not something you're comfortable with, again, there's lots of other yoga podcasts you can listen to. And then for the one who was championing or trying to defend her beloved yin hero because they thought that I was apparently being a little hard on them, those again are your feelings and you have the right to your feelings. If that made you uncomfortable, totally valid. That's fine. But just know that you're not speaking for the guest. The guest knew that question was coming. The guest was open to debate and the guest is coming back. So just, you don't have to defend your heroes. They can defend themselves. And I will never stop asking tough questions. And I will never stop bringing up things if I don't agree. And if my opinion changes due to new information that I get from my guests or other sources, then I will change my own opinion. Right? So beliefs and opinions, if you're thinking critically, can change. There's all kinds of things that I believed in my 20s and even my 30s that I definitely do not believe anymore. And so this is part of being an ever evolving, ever growing, thinking human being, is being able to have these critical thoughts, to take in all the information, and maybe have the courage to say, you know what, I used to think, but maybe I'm wrong, actually. And we can't do that if we're never challenged. If no one ever pushes back against our opinions or our facts or our information, then we never really get the chance to explore them and go, actually, do I think that? Where does that information come from? Is this something I was handed to by a teacher? Or is this something that, I've actually spent the time to study and I believe is true? I remember in my very first teacher training, the teacher said to us, there will be some things in this course that will push your buttons, and you may want to push this information away. Before you do, I would ask that you do a couple of things. Number one, actually explore the information. Is it not true? Or are you just uncomfortable with new information, which is normal, by the way, as humans. We're often uncomfortable with new information. This is why critical thinking is so important, so that we don't just automatically push away new information because it makes us uncomfortable. So she said, if it's uncomfortable for you, stop and sit with it for a while. Meditate on it, journal about it, whatever it is. And if through that process of investigation, you don't think that whatever it is that I've said that pushed your button is true, it just does not fit with your beliefs, your experience, you've investigated it, and it's still just a no. All the evidence, it's a no. Then throw it out. It's not for you. If, however, it does push your button and you are just uncomfortable with it because it's new information, that is where the growth lives. So if as humans, especially as teachers, we want to be ever evolving, growing, expanding human beings, then critical thinking and sitting with our discomfort when new information comes up is part of that process. Just like in a yin pose, anybody when they probably did their very first yin pose, let's just say whatever body part you're feeling it in, you're like, I am keenly aware of this area of my body and I'm uncomfortable and I'm going to be here uncomfortably feeling this sensation for many minutes at a time. Now, if we just come out because we're uncomfortable, then we never get the rest of that yin yoga magic, right? We don't get the physical benefits, the mental benefits, the emotional benefits, the personal growth benefits, the nervous system benefits, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So some yoga teachers call this coming to your edge. I don't really love that word, so I don't use it. But when you come up against being uncomfortable in your yin practice, this hopefully can train us for when we come up against something that makes us uncomfortable when we're not on our yoga mat. Right? Like if your yoga practice is just about making these funny shapes with your body and just about the physical benefits, but it's not actually translating when you get off of the mat into your real everyday life, then you are missing the point of practice. So if I say something that's new information to you, that pushes a button and makes you uncomfortable, or I say it in a way maybe that makes you uncomfortable, then that is an opportunity to do one of two things: reject it without investigation, or explore it and see if it's true for you. And perhaps if it is, that will inspire growth. We are always uncomfortable with new information, just like we are in our yin pose for the first few times when we come up against that little bit of, I got a sensation here. And what? I have to be here for 5 minutes exploring this sensation? That's uncomfortable. But then when we get to the other side of it, that's where the magic lives. And it's the same with our life. So if you only hear opinions that are comfortable, if you only hear viewpoints from people that make you comfortable, then you are missing out on a huge amount of growth as a human being. One of the practices that I do off of the mat intentionally is that I actually intentionally go out of my way to hear opinions from people who I disagree with, and I listen to them. I don't immediately like, no, but, or reject them as all the labels that they use now to divide us. They're right leaning, they're left leaning, they're this, they're that, whatever. I'm going to listen to people whose opinions I disagree with. And I'm going to take them in and I'm going to explore them and I'm going to think about them and meditate on them and journal about them and all the things, so that I know if I then decide, no, that doesn't feel true to me, that it's because I've actually taken the time to critically think and investigate it for myself, that I am thinking for myself. And this is something, especially as teachers, because whether we like it or not, we are leaders in our community. Often we are leading people. And whether we're comfortable with it or not, sometimes our students look up to us. I know I'm really uncomfortable with that. Sure, I'm not alone in that. So it's even more important then, when you're in a role of leadership, to start to practice the skills of critical thinking. So rather than just living in an echo chamber where everyone you talk to believes the same thing that you do, and everyone that you follow on social media has all the same opinions, and et cetera, branch out of that. Start listening to people who say the opposite of what you believe and ask them questions so that you can be curious and learn. Maybe you have the same belief afterwards, after you've taken the time to listen and explore and investigate. Maybe not. Or maybe you meet somewhere in the middle. Or maybe it just sort of softens your heart a little to people with the opposite opinion, because once you understand why they have that opinion and where that's coming from, you're like, oh, okay, well, I still disagree with you, but that's fine. So in our very divisive world that we live in, even more so, we need critical thinking. Thinking critically also helps when you're actually in your class teaching. Paul Grilley, if he had not been a critical thinker, would have never looked at the bones of different people and noticed how different they were, and then gone exploring that, and then thereby eventually creating Anatomy for Yoga, which if you've not watched and you're a teacher, you need to get that. There's a link in the show notes and watch it, because mind will be blown. Had he not been willing to think critically and question some of the things that he had been taught, then we would still all be teaching yoga and believing in yoga that there's a one size fits everybody yoga pose, and that everybody can do the same thing, and that we're all the same on the inside. Everybody's bones are the same. So if Paul had not been willing to challenge some of what he had been taught and what he had believed, and sit with some uncomfortable things and some curiosity about that, if he'd not been a critical thinker and able to sit with this new information and be curious and explore it and investigate it, we would all be missing out on that information. So this is why cultivating the skill of critical thinking as a teacher, and especially I will say as a yin teacher, because there is no one size fits all, there is no so-called alignment rules in a yin practice. So we do have to be open and curious to what's in front of us with our students. And this, hopefully, critical thinking will then carry out into the rest of our lives, where when we hear someone's opinion that kind of, pushes our button a little bit, instead of reacting immediately and either rejecting the person or defending our view or getting all loud and in their face, we can actually pause and go, tell me more about that. What do you believe? What makes you think that? Get curious about these things. Have conversations with people you agree with, people you don't agree with, and people who you don't even know their opinions, so that you can grow and evolve as a human being and as a leader in your community. So that's what I wanted to say about critical thinking. And that's what most of this episode's been about, is that the two little bits of feedback that I got, again, one was that I was edgy. Thank you very much. I will take that as a compliment. And this, if that means that I'm assertive, blunt, honest, I don't sugarcoat things, and I don't blow smoke up people's butts, that's what you mean by edgy. I'll own that. I'm also sarcastic. I'll own that too. I'll even own the foul language because I also like that about myself. So if all of that is too edgy for you, that's okay. I will send you away with love and well wishes, but be on your way. And then the other one, somebody sort of trying to run in on their white horse and defend their yoga hero who did not need defending, knew about the question in advance, and was totally open to discussion and debate, even if it's uncomfortable, and is coming back on the show. That was you. Just worry about yourself, my friend. And if it made you uncomfortable to have somebody that you admired questioned, ooh, then there's a question for you. Why does that make you uncomfortable? I have this yoga hero, and when somebody was pushing questions at this yoga hero and made this yoga hero of mine, in my perception, feel like they were on the spot, and that made me uncomfortable. Ooh, well, now there's something to ask yourself. Why was I uncomfortable with that? Why am I uncomfortable with difficult questions? Why am I uncomfortable with people's beliefs and opinions being challenged? That's a good one for you to sit with. Okay, and then the last little bit of housekeeping that I want to do for this very first episode of 2026 has nothing to do with critical thinking, but I figured since we're addressing viewer comments and listener comments, why not do this one too? Okay, friends. So this one, I think, was a matter of lost in translation. So I often use the term Vinyasa bunnies. Some of you have probably heard me say it before. I could use a different word. I could use Vinyasa Barbies. There could be a whole bunch of words that I use for that. The reason that I use that particular one is because it's a spin or a pun on another thing that you may not know about, which is a snow bunny. Okay. So when I say Vinyasa bunny, and again, this won't translate if you are not in North American culture and maybe somewhere where there's cold. So you probably wouldn't make the connection that Vinyasa bunny is a pun based on a snow bunny. So I'll explain that for you. So a snow bunny, I'll give you a little definition here. A ski bunny or a snow bunny has a few connotations depending on the context. So they're an inexperienced skier. The original and most common ski-related definition is a female skier who is a novice or not very experienced, or they may be seen as more interested in the social scene, the fashion, or the after-ski social activities than the skiing itself. Attractive, fashionable woman who frequents ski resorts, often wearing stylish or impractical ski gear. So those are a couple of definitions of snow bunny or ski bunny. So when I say Vinyasa bunnies, I'm making a pun. Now, let's define what I mean by Vinyasa bunny. Vinyasa bunny doesn't just mean somebody who practices Vinyasa, right? Vinyasa bunnies are a stereotype, or I could call them Vinyasa Barbies, if that makes you more comfortable. A stereotype of a kind of student that usually is pretty new to yoga. They're often attracted to yoga because they want to get their yoga workout or their yoga body in time for swimsuit season. They think yoga is a workout. They're often either really obsessed with Vinyasa or sometimes hot yoga. Those are usually the entry points for the Vinyasa bunnies. And what they're looking for in a class is very surface, kind of shallow, and entertainment. They're not looking to go deep. They want a pump and playlist that makes them want to dance. They want a different sequence that they can't predict each time. They're not really interested in like meditating or diving inside or any of that kind of thing. That is a Vinyasa bunny, or we could call them a Vinyasa Barbie. They're more interested in how cute their yoga outfit is and taking the selfie of themselves on their mat than they are the practice itself. They're probably attending yoga because at one point they thought it was trendy, or maybe they still think it is. So they're not really looking at or interested in the bigger, deeper picture of yoga. That is what I mean by a Vinyasa bunny or a Vinyasa Barbie, whichever you'd like to use. So I realized that the person who brought this out, it was like, I don't understand. Why are you saying Vinyasa bunny? I practice Vinyasa. It's from Spain. Spain obviously does not have snowy mountains filled with ski bunnies or snow bunnies. So obviously it's a cultural reference and a cultural pun that would have been missed. So for anyone else who doesn't live in North America near some ski hills and has never heard of a snow bunny or a ski bunny, Vinyasa bunny is just a pun on that. And now I have defined Vinyasa bunny for you. And the reason that this comes up is because often I will use the term Vinyasa bunny as a way to describe a certain kind of student that could show up in your classes and what to do when they do, because they're expecting something very different than what Yin is offering. And so in order for them to not leave partway through the class or hate Yin forever, there requires more explanation and guidance to a Vinyasa bunny about Yin than it would if it was somebody who actually came to yoga because they were interested in meditation. Very different mindsets between those two. So when I say Vinyasa bunny, or maybe I'll start using Vinyasa Barbie now, who knows? I'm referring to a really specific group of practitioners that usually are young. They're all about their yoga pants and their green smoothies. They're looking to get their yoga workout. They're all about the playlist. They're the ones taking selfies of themselves on their yoga mats before classes. They're not looking at yoga as the deep, rich tradition that it is. They're not coming to yoga classes to learn to meditate. They're not coming to yoga classes for any of that sort of inner, deeper experience. They're coming for the flash. Now, that doesn't mean that they're not welcome. And it doesn't mean that as teachers, we can't guide them over to the Yin side. We can. I talk about it a lot in the episodes, which is why the term Vinyasa bunny came up. So we can guide those people to the fact that there is another way. There is another side of yoga that has nothing to do with your fancy Lululemon pants and your selfie and your, pump and playlist and how many chaturangas you did. But there's a whole other quieter, deeper, I would say more challenging side to yoga. And that's what we learn in Yin. And so if you have Vinyasa bunnies in your class, that's an opportunity for you as a teacher to step up and to really shine a light on what Yin has to offer and what makes it different and what makes it special. And, I have a whole bunch of episodes on how we do that. So if you're new here, if this is your first episode, welcome. But I have a whole bunch of episodes on how we do that with students, the ones that are bored, fidgety, that are like, I don't get it. What's happening here? So I mentioned that in many episodes, but I just wanted to clarify what the term Vinyasa bunny actually means when I say it. All right, my friends, I think that's enough for this episode. More than enough, actually. So there is a little bit about critical thinking and some of the comments and feedback that I've gotten about being edgy and debating guests. There is nothing wrong with a little debate. In fact, it's a very good thing. So remember that might be your discomfort. Sit with it, question it. What makes me uncomfortable about this? And then I define the term Vinyasa bunnies for those that are like, yeah, but I also like Vinyasa. If you're doing Yin and Vinyasa, you are not a Vinyasa bunny. I'm not talking to you when I say that. But if you're listening to this live, we are still in January. Remember, winter is the time of rest. Please take some time to rest. And until the next one, bye for now.